Well, now we've got the makings of a good shutter here, now that it's all clean. The blade's snappy in its action, speed train, everything seems to work well. Start putting everything else back in place. So I'll start with the flash contact. This is always entertaining to wriggle into place. It's square, it goes in a square hole, but the end of it is often split and splayed and doesn't want to go down the hole. And it's delicate, so you can't just push it hard and hope for the best. It's sort of started. I'm going to loosen the case screws at the back, see if it'll give me a bit more wriggle room. You have to remind me to tighten those up once I'm done, otherwise there'll be trouble. Wasn't this one tight to get out to start off with? I think it might have been. That was it. It's seated. Right. Just as well you reminded me to tighten those 3 screws. And the fixing screw, which is brass. All of these components tended to be a little bit stained looking, and I can't really tell whether it's from oil staining or what the story was. Here's the pallet for the pallet wheel. Let's check that rattles backwards and forwards smoothly, it appears to. And here's the wheel that drives the pallet wheel. And it's got a little cam on the top which shifts the flash contact. And the toe of that cam I want to lubricate with just a touch of molybdenum paste, so that when the lever it operates runs across it, it runs smoothly. There's no unwanted roughness at that point. The flash contact can go in, but I'll put the high speed spring, the 500th of a second spring on first. Moving flash contact here, that just about fell into place that time. Now at this stage, while you're tightening the screw down, make sure that the arm's not sitting on top of that cam, that it's sitting behind it. So it's, otherwise when you do the screw up, the end of the arm will get bent and then nothing will work correctly. Right, so I'm just going to turn that cam and make sure that it rotates in both directions smoothly. And you can see as I rotate it that the flash contact makes at this point here. That's good. That's the M sync for the flash. Alright, here's the lever that needs to go, and I'm just going to put a wipe of molybdenum paste on the point of that lever where it fixes to the catch. This is the catch that holds things in place when it's cocked. See if we can get this over the post. Get this wriggled down into place without it anything coming adrift. Bring that round there, let's try that. Let's have a look at that. Now that's right. Here I've got the toe of that cam pointing towards the centre of the shutter more or less. This piece here is behind the latch, so it can't go any further around that way. And the arm here moves freely past the side of that lobe on the cam. That's all correct, and that's exactly where it needs to be. And that was just more good luck than good management that it fell into place so easily. Now I've got to put the spring in place that drives that mechanism. So with the latch here swung around to stop this arm moving, I've got to put the spring in place in that hole, stretch this spring out and hook it over that post. It's the post closest to the outside of the shutter. Okay, that part went well. There are two brass standoffs. They go here and here. They're easy to dislodge while you're trying to get everything in place. And the cover here, the toe here goes into a little groove in the case. There's two holes that need to go over two pins. So you've got to achieve all of these things at the same time. One of the pins is in place. That's it. Of course, while you're at it, you've got to make sure that this spring is on the right side of that post and that this arm is on this side of this tab and not sitting on top of it. So you don't have to watch out for much all at the same time while you're trying to wriggle in something that doesn't want to wriggle. The plain screw goes at this end. Now that standoff shifted, so I'll just pull that back into line with my tweezers. That screw goes there, and that's the plain screw. Just run that down lightly. Now that brass standoff at this end is shifted, it's hiding somewhere. Where's it gone? Okay, back as we were. Take that screw out. The other brass standoff is moved and disappeared somewhere. Oh, there it is. If I can fish that out. No, that would be too easy. Alright. I'll have to check this closely once I've got it off, because it's all fairly thin pieces of metal, and They bend, and when they bend, of course, they're not lying where they should be lying. Okay, so there's that standoff that has just shifted over there. This is now moved. Let's get that back in its latched position. Just checking the state of this. It doesn't look flat. So this arm, this moving arm, is rubbing on it. I think that's okay. Let's try that. Standoffs are in position. Get that across there, get that over that pin. That standoff's trying to get away. Get the screw in there. That standoff is where it should be. Get the XM flash sync lever in place. Why did that screw not want to go in? Ooh. Get that screw started. Just make sure the end of this spring is not trapped underneath it. And that down lightly. Tighten that screw. Tighten that screw and get this spring in place behind the stud on that arm there. That's better. Like that. So that's spring loaded now. Get that back in the cocked position. Check the arm here, make sure that moves freely. That looks good. Okay, B lever time. The B lever sits here and it's held in place with a screw with a spring surrounding it, and at the moment the spring is off the screw, so we'll just get the screw started. See if I can get that spring in position and then tighten the screw. There's a groove around the head of that screw that spring sits into. You need to make sure it's in the groove and not trapped underneath the screw head. That looks okay. Now I've got to get the spring positioned at either end. Oh, that spring's just fallen off. That was great. Let's see if it'll go back on as easily as it came off. Yeah, it is behaving today. I'll hook the end of that spring. My tweezers unfortunately aren't pointy enough for this job. There, that's it. Just drag that spring back and hook it behind the arm here. That's good. That's now sprung loaded, and the other end is in place. It's on that piece. So that's good. I'll just check that screw, make sure it's tight, make sure the B lever moves. That went quite well. The shutter release lever, the spring on this is a funny shape and it needs to tuck down into the case at that point and wriggle this onto its pivot. And now I should be able to cock this action, sliding that thing across, and it releases. Let's try it on the other setting. That's moving well, that's good. Well, this shutter now really only lacks the main lever, and so I've got to apply some molybdenum paste to the areas I want to lubricate, which is on that tab, on that spot there, on this lever that swings the pallets in or out of the mechanism, on the face of this lever where the main lever runs across there, forcing the retard gear train to move. The main lever itself I want to run molybdenum, excuse me, forgotten where I was up to now. Oh right, okay, molybdenum paste, the inside edge, the outside edge, and on the bird paw, this piece is called the bird paw. I'll put some on the beak there, and this little arm at the back there, I'm putting some on there. That should be sufficient. Where are we? Get that spring goes that way up. Let's just put a wipe down the side of that for good measure. Right. So no, that phone call was my wife checking to see what terrible things were wrong with her car. She had a terrible rattle and needed it fixed, and so she went to work in my car. Turns out the terrible rattle was an easy fix. It was just the sun visor on the passenger side was not in its clip, wasn't parked in its clip, and so it was rattling up and down as she drove. Right, so that's in place. Just get this spring over the post. Wish all jobs were as easy as that. Now this spring here, that was bent, wasn't it? It was bent, it still is. Let's see if I can straighten that a bit. Yeah, that's good. That wouldn't have had enough tension to stay latched in place properly, but it's good now. Everything's sitting there ready to go. So, unless there's some other magic fault that I haven't spotted, the shutter's now going to work. So I'm just going to run some molybdenum paste around the centre there, where this runs around that lens tube, around the surfaces here of that cam. There are more surfaces down here, but they're hard to get to, and it'll transfer from one spot to another. And where the high-speed spring is compressed at this point here, and that should do it. Let's get this in place. Swing that over, get the B lever out from underneath because it gets trapped otherwise. Now this is the B setting. The shutter should open on B. That works. Let's try it around here. This is about 1/10 of a second. That seems to work. What about 1 second? 1 second would be about here. That looks pretty good. And the high speed setting 500, this will be about a 2/50th of a second. And this will be the, oh, if I can compress, oh I can't do it, hang on. Got to set that first, then cock the shutter. That moves, that works well. Now that all appears to go well, so I can check those speeds on my shutter tester, but there is probably nothing wrong with that. So I'll rotate that to lock that in position, and I do not have my screwdriver in front of me to latch this in place. I can use the tip of my tweezers. That'll do it. Okay, so there's the shutter. I need to test my speeds and make sure they're good. And if they're good, I can close it up from here. Everything seems good, so now I can put the outer case in place. First of all, I've got to get my flash wire in position. I'll hold that in with one finger from behind. That's not very well focused, is it? What's wrong with this video camera? Here we go. Now the little plastic insulator needs to go in there. This tiny black screw that holds that in position goes there. See if I can get that started. It's very dark here today. Bit hard to see these tiny bits. Get that started with that screwdriver and finish it with the smaller screwdriver. That's good. This piece, this is the curved cocking rack. I'm just going to wipe the inside of that and the top and bottom edges with molybdenum paste. Doesn't need much, doesn't need as much as that. Now if I cock the shutter, drop this rack down into the case in its correct position, rotate it round so that the end of the rack is clear of the arm it moves on the shutter. Then this should all fall into place, just like that. Let's get you back up on a block of wood so we can see what we're doing. Now there are two screws. The one that came with the camera, and the one that didn't come with the camera, but I've managed to find in my spare parts boxes. Last but not least, this is the detent for the aperture settings. Now the little notches are not symmetrical, they're further apart at the large aperture end, at the f2 end, close together at the f16 end. Check that that works. That works. Okay. So there's the shutter. That's all looking pretty good. At the front we have a trim ring here. I'll just make sure that there's no dust sitting in here. Our front lens group, which I've cleaned quite thoroughly, and it really doesn't have a serious problem with haze after that. That looks quite good. I'm very pleased with the state of that. Likewise the rear group. That's pretty good too. I've seen better examples, but that's a good example. And our shims. Now there's quite a few metal shims here and one paper one. Now when there are multiple metal shims, always make sure that the paper shim is sitting in the middle of the stack so that it's not vulnerable to damage. And I'm just going to put the retaining ring loosely on the back, because that shutter is finished now, and once I've serviced the camera body, that can go back in place. But that was one of the headline problems with that particular camera, and it's good to have that task out of the way. I'll go back to the camera body now. And have a look at this. So what do I know about this? Well, the door's a bit rattly. It means that the arms top and bottom need a little bit of a squeeze to give them a bit more tension. The focus is very stiff. Because the arm's rattly, it means that the lens standard here at the front is rattly too. It means it moves up and down. The frame counter doesn't work. 99 times out of 100, that means that the spring's broken. So we'll open that up and find out.